So let's talk about 1,000 planets. Hey folks, DonLasagna here, and this is a video about Starfield. Like many, I've had my eye on it for a bit, and Bethesda dropped one massive bombshell on us during their most recent showcase of the game. There will be 1,000 planets to explore, and you'll be able to land on all of them with your starship. As in, you drag a cursor on the planet and land on them wherever you want. At least, that's what it seems like based on the gameplay they've shown. Many have had varying opinions to this, from No Man's Sky fans being excited to have yet another game like it on the market, to cautious optimism and faith in Bethesda, to those worried that this will ruin a lot of what made Bethesda's game special at all. But how do I feel about this? Well, I'm honestly not sure. I'm a little worried, to be honest. But I'm also cautiously optimistic. Either way, it's interesting to talk about because I think it brings to a head the unique challenges Bethesda faces when making their games. See, Bethesda's games have always felt like they've been held up by two core pillars that simultaneously support each other and are opposites of one another. The first pillar is that of the traditional RPG. You go to towns, talk to people, do quests, follow storylines. Hopefully these choices acknowledge your character in some way, give you choices, make you live with the consequences of those choices in ways that create new and emergent gameplay and story opportunities. Stuff like that. These are things that make the world feel immersive and reactive. They're the context that makes you care about the things you're doing. This pillar is often enhanced by meticulously crafted content for the player that is unique and feels like something greater than just another fight with standard enemies. The second pillar is what I call the freedom pillar, or freedom in exploration. You explore beautiful landscapes, clear out dungeons, you loot and pillage locations for resources to feed into your character, equipment, or more recently, your settlement. It's the feeling of being this lone explorer, charting a course in whatever direction you feel like. This pillar thrives off of scale, off of having a world that is vast, or at least one that feels vast. It's why I'm sure millions of people who have over 100 plus hours in Skyrim haven't completed the main quest. It's why people play Red Dead Online and roleplay as cowboys despite how bare bones the content actually is. It's why, even at launch, No Man's Sky had its fans. The trick is that both pillars affect one another in the Bethesda formula, but have almost opposite requirements. If you have nothing but handcrafted stuff, the game feels less like a world and more like a series of theme park rides for you to explore. It can feel artificial. I think a lot of RPGs realize this and just bite the bullet, hoping the stories you find are good enough that you sort of make peace with the fact that it feels kind of gamey and artificial. I also think this is why Bethesda RPGs feel so much different than other RPGs, because they don't have this artificial feeling. Bethesda really puts a premium on immersion and freedom, so they can't really afford to bite that bullet. They need that scale, that immersiveness, the interactable objects, all the details on the interiors, all that stuff that makes Bethesda games Bethesda games. But if you have nothing but scale, you lose all the world building and stories and characters that actually make you care about the universe that you're in. In order for players to feel like the world is an actual world and not just randomly generated landscapes and buildings, you need a good amount of handcrafted content for players to stumble into. But creating scale is a lot of work with a lot of technical hurdles, which can cut into your ability to make this handcrafted stuff. Bethesda's skill as a developer, in my eyes, has always been in their balance of these pillars. That's not to say that each one was as developed as it could have been, or that one didn't take priority over the other sometimes, but that both parts played into each other to be bigger than the sum of their parts. The exploration and handcrafted parts tied into one another. When you do a handcrafted quest, it may direct you to a town. On the way to the town, you stumble upon a new area you didn't expect to find, and feel like this explorer exploring an actual world. Even if that area doesn't have a formal quest, and it's just maybe some audio logs or just a building to explore, it still feels cool purely because you stumbled on it. The same can happen in reverse. You could just be roaming around exploring the land, looking around for cool stuff, then stumble upon a town full of people with quests and dialogue and stories and interesting handcrafted content. It makes the world feel real and vast, like wow, if I can accidentally stumble upon this, what else is out there? Which feeds into the sense of freedom and exploration these games provide. While I think that Bethesda's games have balanced these pretty good for the most part, each game shifts more and more toward the second pillar of emphasizing freedom and exploration in gameplay systems over carefully handcrafted stories. It's a slippery slope to go down, because there comes a point where you end up going from an RPG to a simulation game. That isn't inherently a bad thing. I mean, I think that it would be disappointing if Bethesda went that route, but even aside from that, it's not inherently a bad thing. However, when you lose the handcrafted part of Bethesda's stories, your systems really need to stand up on their own, and we see this fear manifest with the discussion of Bethesda's 1,000 planets. So let's go over the potential negatives of this announcement. First off, bugs. 1,000 planets is a lot of QA and a lot to fix if it goes wrong. Even not factoring the history of games launched in the creation engine, both Bethesda and Obsidian, this is still a massive undertaking. This also leads me to my next worry. 1,000 planets you can land on at any time will 100% cut into how much handcrafted content can be in this game. If I were to guess, it will do that more than maybe any previous system or edition in any Bethesda game has before. It's a simply ludicrous number, to the point that even if all of it's procedurally generated and not handcrafted and kind of samey, it would still take a massive amount of time and resources to make sure it works well. It's not just about the dev time being split though. It's also about the pacing. 1,000 planets brings into question just how many of these will actually be worth exploring at all. How many of them will be the same with minor differences? How many of them will feel like the same planet on repeat over and over again, making the game feel more and more like a drag? Will there at least be hidden events on these planets? How many players will roam the planet's surface for hours looking for something fun, find nothing, get frustrated, leave, and then figure out from an online guide later that all the fun secret stuff was on the other side of the planet where they didn't go? Now you may think, okay, that's fine, you just tell the player where all the cool stuff is. But then that brings me to the worst potential negative, and one that I'm the most worried about. Like we said in previous Bethesda games, the traditional RPG pillars and exploration pillars were intertwined. You would explore and have that sense of discovery as you randomly stumble upon something cool that ended up being a story moment, or maybe even just a location that had some story content but not a formal quest. There's a certain pacing to it all. Enough open space so that your world feels larger, with enough handcrafted content to make the world feel real. With the announcement of 1,000 planets, even if each planet had one handcrafted piece of content on it, which is a pretty large undertaking, but even if, it's still one piece of content per planet. That means that most of the entire planet will just be a big open space. Now, I could be wrong here. I hope I'm wrong. Maybe Bethesda's employees all got hooked up by Tony Montana on the best powder you can find and have been working non-stop day and night, making most of these planets dense with things to do, dungeons to explore, loot to find, whatever. But I don't see it. It's simply not a realistic request from any developer, not even a larger company like Rockstar. But you don't want players to miss the handcrafted stuff either, so the only way to avoid players missing this content is to flag it for them. As a result, it'll be much rarer, if possible at all, for players to randomly stumble upon handcrafted content like we did in previous Bethesda games. Maybe, while we're on our way to doing a quest, we stumble upon a planet, but that planet itself will only have maybe one or a few handcrafted pieces of content. And again, you have to find a way for players to avoid missing that content. So I feel like there'll have to be a clear separation between the two pillars. There'll be quests which guide players to handcrafted content, and there'll be planets which will be cool looking areas with, for the most part, nothing to do beyond collect resources. The two pillars of Bethesda's design are no longer going to play off of each other in the same way, and that feeling of stumbling upon some developed piece of content is probably going to be gone. The pacing of exploration is completely off, and may even be discouraged as most of the areas end up being just empty. Maybe they'll have some of the handcrafted content spawn anywhere on the planet, kind of like how random events occurred in the older Fallout games, like Fallout 1 and 2, where, you'd be walking and then randomly get a random encounter to have some enemies fight you or jump you or whatever. But that's a fundamentally different feeling than discovering an area by wandering around that was always going to be in that spot, and you just happen to walk into that area. For the most part, the handcrafted content and exploring content will mostly need to stand on their own, and the unique feeling of them both interacting will be gone. So those are the negatives, but what about the positives? Well, 1,000 is a large number, and that alone can be pretty exciting. Being able to pick a planet and land on a part of it that maybe no other player has seen before can be a really cool feeling on its own. I'm sure systems will be very similar to each other, and many planets and environments will be repeated. However, even that can end up being a good thing if you're really into building outposts. Since I'm sure similar environments will have similar resources, you can be able to reliably gather those resources effectively by picking similar planet types. There's also the fact that there is a certain appeal to just having some empty space to stomp around in, to fly around on planets and take in the sights. There are some games where that is all you can do, and those games are fairly popular. But having the ability to do that in the same game, you can do looting and combat and settlement building and questing and joining factions and figuring out an alien mystery, is cool. It's like the context of there being so much other stuff to do can make just flying around feel a bit more meaningful. There's also the fact that 1,000 planets with multiple places to build outposts is a lot of content. It may end up being samey content and just kind of a grind, but if you're really interested in that grind, in settlement building, you're probably in for a treat with Starfield. I'm sure terraforming a planet can feel like the supercharged version of cleaning up a settlement in Fallout 4. Having tons of custom settlements to take care of and feed you resources can also make you feel like you're really charting a course in this galaxy. And if this is tied to the faction system in the game, which, based on the footage that was shown, is likely, that could be a cool feedback loop that makes both factions and settlements feel more worthwhile. The biggest plus, however, is the fact that a bunch of blank planets in a vast galaxy is maybe the most fertile ground that modders have ever had in any Bethesda game. No longer will you have to worry about breaking precombines in some nearby town because you decided to add an interior to a previously blocked off building. Nor will you have to worry about building somewhere another more popular mod is touched. Now, you can just pick a planet, pick a spot, and more than likely your mod won't conflict with anything else. Assuming a lot of these planets are just resource nodes, these planets can end up being just as much of a frontier to modders as they are to the explorers in this actual universe. Ultimately, however, we'll just have to see what happens. Maybe the quest will play into the settlement building enough that blank planets won't feel like these disconnected areas from the rest of the game. Maybe it'll synergize really well, maybe not, I don't know. But I want to know what you all think. Do you think 1,000 planets is a good idea? Are you focused on the fear of losing an experience you enjoy, or excited about the new experiences that could come? Let me know down below, and be sure to like, subscribe, and share the video if you want to see more of it. My next video will be a scene-by-scene breakdown of the trailer and my thoughts. For those just discovering the channel, I have movie reviews of both the Disney Star Wars trilogy, which is by far my most popular video, and one about the Daniel Craig James Bond movies. I'm also currently in the middle of a series on developing my ideal Elder Scrolls 6. Just the perfect Elder Scrolls 6 for me that comes with its own gameplay changes and design discussions. If you're interested in that, I'll also link that down below and on the screen. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.